Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Maybe more people will filter in, maybe more will not. I know how to share my screen. All right, you guys can see my screen. Okay, so Genesis 6. Um, and tonight we're gonna do really just the first 8 verses of Genesis 6. There's quite a lot packed in there. We could just maybe skip over some things um, and do the whole thing, but uh, I think it deserves a little bit more attention than that. Um, and also, there are some things about this that are different from whenever I've taught on this in the past that I want to bring up. So before I start reading, um, I think kind of one of the important things here that I've mentioned before is that a lot of times it's unclear. Um, like the Bible doesn't necessarily handhold you into telling you whether or not something is good or bad. Um, Sometimes I think it is pointing that way, um, but there can be a lot of room for interpretation on that, and we're going to see kind of um, a big split on there in this section. Um, and so I just, as we read it, I think people should just think about like, okay, how would I think about these things if I was interpreting what's occurring as being a bad thing, and how would I interpret what I'm reading if I was thinking about them as being actually a good thing. Okay, so here we go. First one. When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man and bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was, was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. And so the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Okay. What did we get? Oh, that might. Hi, Michael. Okay. So the primary kind of views, um, which the the second one I would kind of usually refer to as like a Heiser view, but I want to make it more broad than that. So I would say the two big categories of views that you could separate this kind of passage into are like good and bad. And the primary good interpretation is what I would refer to as like the Sethite view. And then the other one, I guess I would call like the Giants view, right? And so this is going to be like the Heiser view. This is that takes this passage as being an overall kind of negative event. Um, and so really the question kind of fundamentally comes down to the sons of God right here. So in Hebrew, what this is the B'nai Elohim. Um, so B'nai means sons, and God being like spirits. So the Sethite view is going to hold that. So the question is like, who are the sons of God? So the Sethite view is going to say that the sons of God are the sons of Seth. So we talked earlier about how there's going to be kind of this growing trajectory of um,
Oh, yummy, yummy, yum.
people
Come on, come on, shoot it.
Michael, we need you. We gotta mute you, bud. I don't know how do I mute Michael?
He did it.
He did it. All right, champ. Thank you. So as I was saying, right, there's the view that there's going to be a growing theme about people that follow after the name being Hashem, and people trying to make a name for themselves. And I broadly kind of categorize that as the descendants of Seth versus like the descendants of Cain. It's not exactly the case, and there is intermarrying between them, but that's how I see it. Not everybody else is going to see that trajectory, and so a lot of them won't take that into account whenever they interpret this. Um, and so they'll just see something like the sons of God and be like, oh, well, the sons of God is a positive thing. And so we want to be children of God. And so it's positive. Therefore, it applies to the quote unquote good line, which is the Sethite line. So I think I have it linked somewhere on the server. So like Inspiring Philosophy takes a Sethite view of Genesis 6, and he will advocate for that. So you can go watch that to get more info on that. Whereas the Heiser view, the view that sees this passage in an overall negative light, will interpret sons of God to be actually a class of angelic being. And actually, in Heiser's view, the sons of God are actually kind of the highest class of angelic being. He would put things like cherubim and seraphim like underneath the sons of God, and part of the evidence for that is what I was gonna talk, just kind of briefly go through, right? So like Heiser's main two big passages, if you don't know, are Psalm 82 and Deuteronomy 32. So in Psalm 82, um, it says, God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. How long will you judge unjustly? Blah blah blah. And then basically he's gonna God condemns them for being bad rulers, and he says, "I say you are God, sons of the Most High." Right. So that right there, sons of the Most High. Um, that's not going to be exact. Most High is going to be a different word than Elohim. I should have done this. I should have done this on here. Can I open up another instance of this? Let's do this properly. Psalm 82.
Yeah, that might give you just like a little bit more
Most
light.
High, I think, is El Elyon. Yeah. Okay, I'm not crazy. So it's B'nai El Elyon. Uh, but still, kind of a um, similar to B'nai Elohim, but then more specifically, and again, let's do it the correct way, that I can actually get the Hebrew up. What am I doing? I'm doing Deuteronomy 32:8. Okay. So here, yeah. So here I'll say B'nai. Ah, yeah. Okay. So now, okay. So this is actually, so right here. So when the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. So the ESV interprets this passage as sons of God. So this is actually um, this little section right here is actually a hotly debated thing in interpretation. I'm probably going to mess up the rationale behind it, but basically it's something like this. There is one set of documents um, that uh, like there's one set of documents, I believe it's the Masoretic texts, that read B'nai Israel. Um, and so that means the sons of Israel. So it reads this passage as sons of Israel. I believe it's the um, I believe it is the old, or sorry, it is the Dead Sea Scrolls, which actually say B'nai Elohim here. It's something along those lines. I didn't do my full research here, as you can tell, because I didn't even bring up the Stuff Bible. But I was gonna. But this is something that I was gonna talk about. Is that there is controversy over whether or not it should be sons of God here, or sorry, whether or not it should be B'nai Elohim or it should be B'nai Israel, and that goes into a little bit like this is one of those places where kind of how you interpret Genesis 6 ends up being a little bit dependent upon how you interpret Psalms 82 and how you interpret Deuteronomy 32. Like, do you think these are angelic beings whenever you have this title, Sons of God, or do you think that it is just like human rulers? The idea of the I also just want to make sure that people know that the number 70 is involved here. So whenever you get to the Table of Nations in Genesis 11, there are 70 basically descendants mentioned, and those are seen as like the 70. They're kind of a they're kind of a list of like all of the countries that Israel knows about, right? Um, and that is supposed to kind of coincide with the fact that whenever Moses goes up Sinai, he has 70 elders with him, right? And so that's why sometimes people make this connection, and then people believe that that is why they started to write. People think that it was an editorial change where they started putting Sons of Israel here to make that connection to the elders on Sinai. Um, I have I have multiple issues with both of these views, and like one of the views that I have with this is And actually, I have this issue with kind of both views. I think there's a lot of circular reasoning that goes along with how um, these things get decided, because basically you have God at some undisclosed point in the past dividing up the nations um, according to the number of people that were going to be on a mountain, uh, like much later in time. And uh, not that God wouldn't know that, it just seems like a very strange and arbitrary connection to make to me. Um, uh, I do, this is one of the things where I do kind of put a point in Heiser's favor, where I think, okay, if God does have this number of angelic beings that he wants to rule each different like nation, and rule in the sense, and this is one I think that you're supposed to get from Psalm 82, rule in the sense of they judge they judge correctly, and they order their own domains correctly, um, and at least the idea seems to be in order to point people back to the Most High, right? It's supposed to be a thing of like, hey, you're like a regional governor of you're like a regional spiritual governor of Syria, and you're supposed to be pointing people back up towards me. And this is where you start to get the ideas like in Daniel, where it talks about the Prince of Persia and like the Prince of Greece and all of these things, that those classes of angelic beings are the ones, they're like the higher classes of angelic beings that were given dominion over a certain territory. And so there's nothing that says this explicitly, but I think you're supposed to get the idea, something along the lines of like someone like in the mind of kind of an ancient Hebrew. Like, I think the argument is that they would think of somebody like Zeus. They would think of him, Zeus, as like a name for like the prince of Greece or something like that. And that really he's an angelic being that was given that domain with the purposes of being like a just kind of ruler and administrator of that territory, with the ultimate goal of pointing people towards uh, Yahweh. But they don't do that. They basically corrupt their places, and that's why there's injustice in all of these other like places.
Real quick,
Yes.
for that verse in Deuteronomy 32,
Yes.
for the take of saying, if I'm tracking with what you were saying, right, for the camp that like interprets it as saying like sons of Israel, or
Yes.
or like based on it's the number of the sons of Israel, how does that gel with the next verse being, but the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob, his allotted heritage?
Yeah. So
Because that seems to camp them all into one thing.
Yeah. So like, what it? I guess I don't understand what you're saying.
What's the correlation? Because it sounds like number of sons of it, that sounds like it's supposed to be pointing towards like the 12 tribes in a way, but it.
Yeah. So what it is so it's supposed to be like, okay, we're gonna get a little bit into like this goes into like my understanding of like so there are some like um there are some sects of Judaism that basically kind of do this whole idea that the Jews like there are Jews that think they are supposed to rule the world. um, there are those, and basically this sort of like goes. So basically, what it is like, okay, so you have the 70 elders, like um uh on Sinai, and so basically the idea is that like if everything is correct, and then you have Moses at the top, right? So Moses is kind of representative of Israel in totality, right? And so, but the Lord's portion is his people, right? Um, and so the Lord's portion is Israel and is the people of Moses. But then underneath that, the nations are divided according to the number of elders, with the idea being that like the elders are supposed to be kind of in charge of uh like those various nations at like some point, right? Um and you get like a similar idea in Revelation with which changes to the elders and like the 12 being representative of the 12 tribes, but also kind of doing a similar thing of like helping to administer, and it is supposed to be a thing of like kind of replacing, the idea is of like replacing the sons of God in um, the divine council. So that is like an idea, but that I don't know if I answered your question.
Well, okay, because maybe I didn't even understand the premise of the take that you were kind of, you know, devil's advocating for, because I don't, this isn't like your
Yeah,
take.
like I'm trying to explain like loosely what some other people's like thoughts are on these. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, okay, and I was just trying to square the idea of saying uh, that like the all the nations have their inheritance divided in mankind, like numbered by the 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 sons of Israel, but like that's not reflecting like the number of like realized nations at the time, or like even like future nations, because or is that basing it on like an implied future reigning of like splitting up nations that's not representative of what like we've seen at any point in history? I'm trying to like get at what they were going for with that take.
Yeah, and again, like I don't know totally. Like I can't fully advocate for these things, right? One way or another. I'm just trying to point you in the direction that other people will point you in.
Mhm.
I didn't. Yeah, I can't do like a full throated defense um, of those different things. I just wanted to get so actually let's go ahead and get back into. So I kind of just explained um, like broadly the two competing views. Let's actually go through like this section now and talk about the different things that I want to point out in it, and we'll just kind of keep those two things in mind, and then hopefully there's time at the end and I can say what my view actually is. Um, and it and it's a view that I haven't actually heard other people articulate. I'm not really sure why, because to me it makes sense. So, all right. So when man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them. Okay. So right off at the beginning, we have a thing that we've kind of talked about already with other things, which is we have a timing issue about how to interpret this time. So whenever it says, when man began to multiply on the face of the land, right? So we just finished in Genesis 5, right? Reading all of this stuff about the generations of mankind, and then we get to Noah, right? And we know that this section is going to end with Noah, and so we're about to do a story about Noah in this time. So whenever it's describing this, is it talking about like that whole period, right? From Adam, right? Is when man began to multiply, is that from Adam to Noah? Or is that like just starting kind of around Noah, right? We have a little bit of a timing issue about how to situate and interpret this little section. And that's kind of going to be important because I think if you take a Sethite view, you sort of need to interpret this as being this whole time frame. Like from at right during this whole time frame, what's the thing that's going on? Oh, people are multiplying on the face of the earth, and they're marrying, and these things are happening during that whole kind of time frame. But if you take it as a negative, and Heiser does take this as a negative, he will refer to this as one of the examples of a fall. And when I talked about before about how there are multiple falls throughout Genesis 6, he sees this section as one of them. Basically, you would need to I feel like in order to see this as kind of a negative thing, you do need to kind of situate it around the time of Noah and not just a thing that was going on the entire time. And part of the reason why I think you need to have that is because you then have this part where it says, and then the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, his flesh shall be 120 years. If you take that like previous part as good, it's kind of confusing as to what's going on here with this 120 years. And to be honest, it's kind of confusing what's going on here with this 120 years in general. It seems like it's a negative thing, right? Because the Lord saying, "My spirit shall not abide in man forever." That seems like it's a negative thing. And so, for he is flesh, his days shall be 120 years. Is that a new thing? Like, when did that start happening? That his days will be 120 years? Well, so there's widely two ways to interpret this 120 years thing. One is that it is a general principle going forward that man just basically won't live longer than 120 years. And basically, after the flood, that's sort of more or less what we see. It doesn't happen immediately, but kind of eventually, people get down to 120 years. And that's sort of what it is today, that the limit is about 120 years. You're then going to get into debate about, is that a hard limit and all this stuff, yada yada yada, whatever. To be honest, I really don't know how like a Sethite view accounts for this and for what's going on here. But the other way to kind of interpret that is that this is more like a prophecy for the time frame for when the flood is going to occur, right? And so basically, it's going to be like when God said this, it was 120 years till the flood happens, which, and I believe, like Noah works on it, the ark, for about 100 years. So, right, that basically would situate when this gets mentioned. I tend to think that it's talking. So overall, I tend to think of this as being kind of a negative thing. I don't really go with the Sethite view on a lot of things. But now, since we're actually getting to the Nephilim, we'll talk about where I disagree with Heiser stuff. And I also just wanted to mention, a couple weeks ago, Christian mentioned, like, what was the connection between, like, he was like, because I talked about how in Greek, the word for breath, like pneuma, like was like related to spirits and like all that stuff. And I was like, and the same thing is true for Hebrew. And then I like forgot where that connection. It's right here. So like you click on spirit, ruach, spirit, wind, breath, mind, spirit, like right there. It's all kind of seen as like a connected thing or idea. So I wanted to make sure I mentioned that. A couple of other things that I wanted to mention before we get to Nephilim. So part of the other reason why I take this as an overall negative passage, it says, and they took as their wives any that they chose. So if you click on that, right, it will say marry, but it is also to take, right? To take in the hand, to seize, to acquire, to snatch, take away, right? And then it also later, oh, yeah, it'll say when the sons of God, came into the daughters of man, right? It is no longer using the euphemism, right, that it was using before for Adam knew, like Yada, right? And so to me, I think that the idea here is supposed to be that, and also, and they took as their wives any they chose. I think the idea here is supposed to be kind of negative. It's supposed to be similar. I think it's supposed to be similar to what's going on with Lamech, right? With Lamech and his wives, where he takes multiple wives, right? I think that it's supposed to be like more forceful and not as intimate, and is therefore in a negative light when with the sons of God having relations with the daughters of men, right? Now, the word Nephilim. Let's talk about that. So the Nephilim were a race of giants mentioned in the context of the sons of God marrying human women before the flood, and later encountered by Israelite spies in Canaan. Mysterious giants mentioned in the pre-flood and post-flood eras. Okay, so the pre-flood and post-flood part is really important, right? Because it says the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward. So one of the main kind of ideas put forward by people that agree with Heiser, and Heiser put forward this idea, and other people put forward this idea, is that the purpose of the flood, or one of the purposes of the flood, is actually to take out the Nephilim. So the idea is that these angelic beings, the sons of God, were mating with human women, and that the result of that is the Nephilim. So the Nephilim are giants that are born of the sons of God and the daughters of man. To me, like the easiest way to kind of interpret that to me is like they're like demigods, right? And these, right? And so the Nephilim should be kind of these like should be seen as like these like half creatures, right? But then it says, and they bore children to them. So this bore children to them. So, right, we've talked about this before about like how, man, my grammar rules are like not applying. So the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they, so like this they should be applying to like the daughters, and then the them should be applying to the last thing before the daughters, so that would be the sons of God, and so that's them. And so the thing that they're talking about is the Nephilim, right? And so then these were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. And so the mighty men of old, so the Gabor, were the Enosh of Shem. Okay, so the best example of what, in my opinion, of what a Nephilim is something like Gilgamesh or Hercules, or Marduk. I think that would like also apply, right? Basically, any kind. So to me, this story, this section is a polemic against the other kind of founding myths of like of these other societies. So you could even put like Romulus, like Romulus and Remus are probably like would have been thought of as Nephilim. Like the Pharaoh, but it wouldn't just be like, so this is the thing that's important. It would apply to like founding like individuals of cultures and societies, but it would also apply to like modern people, right? And so the mighty men of old, the men of renown, right? So that's why you should think of like Goliath. You should think of Goliath as like a Nephilim. You should also think of like the leaders of the other nations, so pharaohs, Nebuchadnezzar, like the rulers of Babylon, Nimrod, all of those. I would argue you could also do that with like modern day people. To me, I think the most like obvious example would be like Elon Musk. Like I think it's fully justified to classify Elon Musk as like a Nephilim. Right. Uh, because like he is a man of renown, and what is one of the things that he does? Like he has how many like kids with like random women? Like I think he applies to this. And we're getting towards the end, so I'll sort of spill my hand here. And I think it's obvious that I don't think of the Nephilim as like a genetic um thing. I think Nephilim is much more like what we were talking about a little bit ago or a few chapters ago. Whenever it'll be like so and so is the father of um, all who play the lyre and pipe, right? It's like a class of people, right? And so almost in the sense that you can like become a Nephilim in a similar way that I think in the future, whenever Jesus will say things like your father is Satan, right? I don't think that is a genetic thing. I think he's talking about the kind of class of people that they um, get put into. Um, uh, Let me take one step back and fully explain the Heiser thing. So, on Heiser's view, Nephilim are uh, these like demigod, half giants, whatever. There are some people that will say that Nephilim have a genetic component to them, and that there will be like, and that's where we get tribes of Nephilim later. The issue I have with that is that if they're supposed to be all wiped out, um, if they're supposed to be all wiped out in the flood, like how are you getting Nephilim later? Um, Unless these instances of the sons of God mating with the daughters of men was continuously happening. Um, I think an example that actually makes more sense, that kind of gels these two things together, um, because I also have issues with just like, okay, if that is a thing that we're going to believe, how does that actually like happen and occur? Like, I have issues with that. I think the way that it makes the most sense uh, can actually be seen in something for someone else that I think it should also be classified as a Nephilim, which would be Alexander the Great. I think he would fall into this category. And if you think about the like the origins of Alexander the Great, so like Alexander the Great is the son of Philip II of Macedon. Like we know that. But there are also stories that say that uh, Alexander the Great is the son of Zeus. And so sometimes those get interpreted as like secret things and all this stuff. But I think that what makes more sense is something like the idea of an idea that we think angelic beings kind of already do, which is like possession, right? Is there a way in which like Zeus possessed and controlled Philip of Macedon into birthing this Nephilim like human being that is Alexander the Great? I think that makes a lot more sense. It gets rid of the genetic component, which I think anytime you start applying genetic components to Bible stories, there's a lot of problems with that. namely because the authors didn't know about genetics and probably wouldn't really know what you're talking about. Um, I think that this idea of possession makes more sense as to what's going on here and would explain why Nephilim can show up again in the future in the minds of Hebrew writers. Does that make sense? Um, does anyone have questions about that? Because we only have 9 minutes, and I figured, and I realized that I actually had other things that I wanted to say. But yeah,
I will comment slash question. I have the right since I was here first almost.
yeah,
um, the thing that's interesting, I definitely am not disagreeing. I think that's a really interesting take that I maybe even would have considered, but definitely didn't for myself. But I thought on like specifically Alexander the Great. Before you had said his name, I was like, oh, I feel like he's a shoe-in,
yeah,
candidate for what you were going at. Um, I know when I've thought about like, um, I feel like it's come up a lot in our church, like the 400 years of silence. God was
yeah,
working in the background, and people always talk about how things needed to happen in the Near East and in that part of the world so that the gospel could be spread in the first century and so on. And Alexander the Great was clearly a big part of that. And
yes,
so I was just kind of wondering. I don't know if there's a question in here, but um, could you say in the same sense of someone like Judas, Satan possesses Judas and he's like, okay, I've got him now. Like this is great. But God obviously knew that was going to happen and was like, well, I've created Judas for a purpose. I know he's going to be corrupted, but I'm still going to use him for a higher purpose. Could you say kind of the same thing about someone like Alexander the Great and all these other men of renown in ancient and modern history in the sense of that God gave Alexander success, the likes of which, I mean, even since I'm not quite sure we've really ever seen. I mean, the guy never lost a battle, right? So did God give him um that level of victory, knowing he was still like kind of under this not demonic possession, but like you said, Zeus, so to speak. Um, could you say both were happening essentially? He was, you know, made by an evil force to do evil things, but God is like, I'm going to use that, and then I'm going to spread Greek culture so that way, the gospel can travel. You see what I'm getting?
yeah. Oh yeah, no. I fully see where you're getting, and that's a thing that like right, which we're probably not even gonna get to, but actually, kind of, uh, so um, I'm gonna not answer your question, but just say yes. But to briefly just say, verse 5 was going to be me arguing against Calvinists, and then verse 6 was going to be me arguing, or verse 6 and 7 was going to be me arguing against a thing that we haven't talked about much in the Bible study, and we definitely didn't in the past one because it's a thing that I've only really come to understand like the past year, which is a view called dynamic omniscience, which is also sometimes called open theism, which is the view that God doesn't know the future, and so God can change his mind. Right, and so whenever it says, "And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth," they think that God doesn't know the future, and so he came to regret. Uh, God came to regret um, man because of these things, um, which is a view that I do not hold and have lots and lots of problems with. But to what you were saying, like because you're talking about how does people how does God interact with these other people that he gives success to and all this stuff. And it's a thing that's I think more clearly answered something like in the story of Joseph, which is at the end of this. But that is kind of the ongoing story actually, I would actually argue that that kind of is the ongoing story of Genesis as a book. It's one of the thematic elements, because right before I was talking about that there's this line of people that try to make a name for themselves, the Enosh of Shem, right? Shem meaning name, right? There's this line of people trying to do that, and then there's this line of people trying to follow the name, which is what Noah is going to be. Noah is a part of the people that are trying to walk with God, that are trying to follow the name, that are trying to follow Hashem. And then the good line ultimately is going through Noah, is going to go down through Shem. Like it's the line of Shem, right? So we have the men of Shem that make their own name versus the line of Shem that are following the name, that are following, that are, because right, Noah walked with God, right? So yes, the argument that I would make is, so like the argument a Calvinist would make is that God just makes people do evil things so that he can get the benefit of doing it in some weird way, and it causes him, it gives God glory in some weird way, and I find that super annoying and I don't like it. I think the better way is that God foreknows what these men of renown are going to do. He knows what the Nephilim are going to do, and so he puts contingency plans in place, and he moves things around behind the scenes to make things happen in order to get the outcome that he wants. And from time to time, because he knows where things are going to go, right, he puts his pieces, like, if I know your army is going to, I'll do this for the, if I know your army is going to walk along this path versus along this path, then I'm going to set up my troops over here. Did I force you to walk that way? No. I just knew that you were going to, because I knew your or I knew your desires. I knew that you wanted to do this certain thing. I knew that you wanted to go over there, and so I set up my stuff over here, right? And so foreknowledge isn't causal, right? Just because I have foreknowledge of an event doesn't mean that I'm causing you to do that event. But because I have the foreknowledge of that event, I can then plan accordingly to make other things happen, right? And so this is why and so there's one aspect of that. There's another aspect of like, okay, how much is God? I guess from your question, like how much is God like actively blessing like Alexander the Great to be like to make this happen? And I guess my answer is that I don't know how much God is actively like I always find those things like hard to say. I think the I do kind of subscribe to this idea of like and this is gonna get, we don't have time to talk about this. Uh, there's a whole debate on Twitter about ensoulment, and what that entails. So like when and how does like your soul get like applied to your body, and are you actually a different, like is your soul kind of different than your physical body, right? The way that this is showing up on Twitter is you have like these like maps of the world, and then you'll say like a percentage, and it's like what's your percentage chance of being born in China versus being born in America? And basically, your odds of being born in China and India are like super high, and your odds of being born in a Western country are super low. And so the point of the post is like, oh well, so you should be grateful for the fact that like you were born in like a Western country. And there's a bunch of people's responses to that is, well, no, my odds of being born in like America are 100% because I couldn't have been born anywhere else. And I could have only been born to my parents. I could not have been born to any other parents. And so there's a 0% chance that I was born anywhere else. So there's this argument about how ensoulment works. And for me, I think that ensoulment is like a thing that happened. I think it is theoretically possible that like you could have been born to different parents, philosophically speaking. And so I do think that there is like an ensoulment process, however that might be. And so what I would argue for your example in particular is I think that the main way that like God blessed Alexander the Great was he made him the son of Philip II, right? Because that was the thing that actually, probably more than anything, led to Alexander's success. Actually, is the fact that he made him like Philip II doesn't get as much credit as he should. he did quite a lot to like reform the army and do all of this stuff, right? And so I'm kind of combining these two ideas. But yeah, I think that God does use the actions, both positive and negative, of people to fulfill his goals. And again, that's talked about more fully in in the rest of Genesis, but more specifically in the story of Joseph. Anybody else? Questions?
Hey, can I chime in on that real quick?
Yeah.
So maybe you could provide some clarification. I'll be honest with you on the whole Calvinist thing or predestination versus free will topic. I think there's a tremendous amount of mystery that I don't know if the human brain can fully comprehend, my personal opinion. I feel like it's one of those, I'm not going to say like, I don't take a hard stance in either direction. I think Calvinists go way too far with, basically saying that God ordained evil or that
Yeah.
God caused evil, not that he allowed it, but he actually caused it.
Yeah.
And so I think that you could never say that God caused evil. That would be, in my opinion, heretical and blasphemous, quite
There's
honestly.
literally a verse that says that God is not the author of evil, which the
Yeah.
reason funny is because then whenever you start asking Calvinists about how do they deal with God's sovereignty with free will, they'll go to the author analogy, which is like God is like the author of a book, but you're a character in the book, and like the characters in a book think that they have free will. And it's like,
Yeah.
wait a minute. so like actually, like, you do think that that God is the author of evil, which is
Yeah.
the exact thing that the verse says God isn't. So you
Right.
yeah. So for people that don't know, I'm a Molinist. We don't have time to talk about that, but yeah, I do take hard stances on
I think it would be interesting to dive into that with a little more detail one of these other weeks to fully understand fully understand the Molinist view, because I think there can even be an oversimplification of that view where you're like, you view the world and the actions of men and the actions of God as like a giant chessboard, and it's like it's a chessboard with a billion squares. or a trillion or a zillion, almost an unlimited, unfathomable number of squares or spaces, I should say. And it's like, to me, that's actually even an oversimplified view. Because I think that the way that free will and God's sovereignty interact, in my opinion, and I would be very interested to hear what you have to say on this on another week. But I've not been I think it's unfathomable. Like, it's beyond almost human comprehension, but I would be very interested to hear what you have to say there. Um, uh, I have some thoughts on the Nephilim if we have
That's what
any
this is
time.
supposed to be about.
So I'd like to get some clarification,
Yeah.
like, so I fully understand your view. This is not a topic of great passion of mine. You know, if we had Andrew, he might throw down with you right now.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, but I do want to see if I could, if I want to make sure I fully understand your position. So when it talks about giants, you view that as more as like metaphorical, like the word giant.
I think it's both. So
Okay.
I think it's interchangeable. So I think that they're so yes, I think that like Goliath is physically a giant. Um, I think that like the Amalekites and other like tribes were probably like physically large. I think most of them were physically large. I also think that the because this is just true. Um, Leaders of civilizations are in general tall. This is just a thing that humans kind of do naturally, where we make tall people our leaders. Like, I hate it, and I think it's one of the dumbest things, especially in the democratic society. But like, just pay attention to the amount that people talk about the heights of presidential candidates. It's ridiculous. Like the amount of people that are like, Ted Cruz can never be president. Like he's too short. And like, you people are dumb. But it matters to a lot of people. Like there's a reason why like like Donald Trump's height was like was a factor in the fact that he won the election. Like it absolutely was. And actually, you can kind of even see this. Like people even talked about this today. Like there was a video that was going viral of Keir Starmer. He's doing a visit to China, and he's walking and he's walking in, and like all of the Chinese people that are in like the honor guard, like standing like lining the row as like Keir Starmer like walks in, they all look massive because they're all like 6 feet or something like that, and Keir Starmer's like 5'8", something like that, which isn't like incredibly short. Like it's a very average height. And so I think that there's just something along the lines of height that goes into that, and so I think it's one of I think this is one of those things where it's kind of a both and so it can get used in kind of either context of someone that had so that someone that's a giant, metaphorically in the fact that they have a lot of influence and they have a lot of power, but also can be they are just physically imposing. Like I have no problem with the idea that an ancient Israelite would look at Shaq and go, "That's a Nephilim," and then they would also like look at Elon Musk, who isn't physically tall, and go, "That's a Nephilim." Like I think they would do it in both camps.
Oh, okay. So you think it like that we can't fully understand. Oh, trying to think of this. So like it would almost be like like we might look at somebody and be like, that guy's a beast.
Yes. Yeah.
Like
Exactly.
whatever
So
whatever that
I
may
wanna
be. He's a yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I want to chime in here and get at the "he's a beast" comment specifically, because this is kind of a take that, if I'm remembering correctly from the language of creation, is that like if you want to set up Nephilim as a category, you can kind of have it just refer to improper unions of heaven and earth. And if you want to replace heaven with like spiritual and earth with like material, you can do that. And I think giants and leaders of nations would kind of fit either aspects of a giant is kind of an abundance of earth and a bit of a lacking of heaven, and spirit leaders of nations is kind of an abundance of heaven and a bit of a lacking of earth, being in that. So giants are so material that the common trope is that they're very big and strong, but what are they lacking in? They're lacking in mental acuity. They're lacking in a lot of like even proper behavior. So they're more beastly. They're more wild, more like nature, like Earth. Whereas men of renown or leaders of nations are more identifying with the ideal of their culture or their nation. And so like I was going to oppose Kyle's possession take and say it's more like embodiment. They are embodiments of the ideal or the God that they're
I don't know that
standing in
those are
for.
different things.
They're
Yeah.
they're not necessarily different things, but
Yeah.
I wanted to break it up from the way you were using possession.
Yeah, because this would be the thing of like, what does it mean for Ares to possess a warrior on the battlefield? And it's like, if there's a guy out there on the battlefield that's just kicking butt, the ancients would have been like, Ares like possessed him or
I
whatever.
think the
But
the
like,
difference is typically of they would also just say that Ares was his dad, and so it's different
yeah,
from like a
they
straight
would do that too,
possession,
right? Right, exactly.
and meaning like
This is why Julius Caesar is Divi Filius. Like he's the
yes,
son of a god. Like
but anyway, so that's like more earth and or more heaven than earth, and what does that typically lead to? That leads to um the domination, the tyrannical. It tends to be the affiliation with that. And so in both cases, and I think that's why you can lump them together in one category of the balance is off from a proper union of heaven and earth, which that would be knowing, as you mentioned, that Adam knows Eve, and that produces a proper offspring. But this is an improper union, and so it's just the sons of God come into the women of the earth, and this is the union that you get. And so that's where I think the link can really be made. Giants to
but I
Nephilim.
also want to say here that this also connects with the idea of right that kind of the broader point, and even kind of goes a little bit to what Diego was talking about with his question. The Nephilim aren't necessarily always bad. I do think they are just like they're like what Evan talked about, like they're unbalanced in some way, but they're unbalanced in some way that gives them a lot of power, and so they can accomplish a lot of things, and that it is possible for the Nephilim to become realigned to the correct um, thing. And I also think that is a part of the story of Joseph as well, which is
Mhm.
part of the reason why I reject a lot of the notions of, oh, Nephilim are this genetic thing, and that there were Nephilim, and that's why, that's why like that's why like the slaughter of the Canaanites needed to happen. Because the thing is and I know Andrew's kind of big on that point, and that is a point like that is part of it. But the problem is that not all of the Canaanites were Nephilim. Like, oh, there were some that were, but not all of them were. And also, like, the thing was is that you then have to start dealing with the question of, are there still Nephilim, right? And because if there are, you then have this problem. And so I forgot, I didn't mention this earlier, but basically, in Michael Heiser's view, Nephilim, when they're dead, can't go to heaven, and so they become demons. So actual demons that do like possession and all of that stuff, in Michael Heiser's view, they are the ghosts of Nephilim. And that's sort of the part where I completely am like, no, I don't agree with that. I do not agree that low level demons are the ghosts of Nephilim.
Can I ask you a question about Jude and
Sure.
how you would handle like I'm sure as soon as I say Jude or Second Peter, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So I'll just say this is that it says that they left their natural places, and I do find that terminology to be interesting
Mhm.
because Paul alludes or uses similar terminology when he talks about in Romans 1, men and women leaving their natural uh, calling to heterosexuality and moving into homosexuality, and they ended up burning for one another. And so it's kind of, I'm not saying that it's a one-to-one connection there because some authors sometimes used similar language differently. But it I do find it interesting, and I'm not like dogmatic about it, but it seems to me there might be a connection there with the Nephilim or these sons of God lowering themselves, leaving their natural state and pursuing that which is outside their nature and God judging them for that. Now there's mystery there. So I would be curious to know how you would handle those passages if you
Yeah.
would see any connection there.
So I still, I don't think it changes much from what I've already said. I do think that what's taking place here is fundamentally like a not good thing. So I do think that it is the son. I do think that like the sons of God, which I do think that the sons of God are a classification of angelic being. I'm okay with the idea of God put them in charge of these different regions. I'm okay with that idea. Um, I'm okay with that. They generally rebelled in various different ways at various different times, and that led them to do various different bad things, such as like right the thing that you're just describing. I would think of that as along the lines of the same thing that we've already talked about of like Zeus like possessing Philip II of Macedon to have Alexander the Great. Like that's how I would think of that. And I think that God sees that like um angelic interference as like a bad thing. Um, but I think that he utilizes it uh, to his ends in different ways. Um, and so yeah, that's basically how I think of it. Um, did I answer your question?
Yeah, I would be curious. So you have no problem seeing sons of God as angels,
No.
and it may have caused, I wouldn't say a layer of confusion, but maybe some clarification is needed. Are you saying that the sons of God may have possessed these leaders
Yeah.
and so they took possession of these leaders, and when in so doing, when these leaders um had
And
intercourse with
not
their
necessarily.
wives, they produced a seed of giants. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
Both metaphorically and potentially in reality. like metaphorically and physically
Yeah.
giants.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's
I
sort of
gotcha.
that's sort of where I think, and because those, so right, because I think that those can be like the same, right? Like I think that those can be the same thing.
It's a both and is what you're saying.
Yeah. It's a both. It's a both hand. Like you can have
Okay.
you can have just a really big guy. You can have a really big guy that's also really smart. You can have a guy that's not very big but also be really smart, and can use the systems of men to become men of renown. And if they do that, I think that they fall into the category of what a Nephilim would be. Um, yeah, that's how I think about it, and I think that that is how an ancient Israelite would have thought about it. And it's just that some Nephilim are easier to see than others, right? So like a tall Nephilim is going to be easier to see than one that's just like really good at business or whatever, right? Um, but both of them can equally like screw over your life. So they would have been concerned about both of them.
I just want to throw in quick that I agree with your take of sometimes good Nephilim, because I would point at George Washington as an example of a Nephilim. And I would redouble my disagreement with your take on saying possession, because I feel like that avenue of thinking gets kind of wrapped up in some materialist thinking of being like
Sure.
they have to possess him while they're
Yeah.
being like conceived, and but rather, because I think, why would we be talking about this, or in a way that's actually kind of applicable to us, is that if if you don't kind of focus yourself correctly, I think you could actually push yourself into being a Nephilim, because you could follow after an ideal in the same way of like an Elon Musk, and like
Well,
barrel ahead in that direction, and kind of chase after making that name for yourself.
yes.
Which, if
Which then gets into the like, right, this is kind of why people relate it to the, I believe it's in Corinthians, where Paul is talking about the head coverings, and he's like on the account of the angels, and pretty much people like are like, oh, he's referencing Genesis 3 right there, and like, so like what is he talking about there? And this is part of the reason why I don't think it's a genetic thing. I don't. You're never going to convince me that there is a class of human being that cannot be saved by Jesus Christ. Okay, you're just not going to convince me of that. And if you think that the Nephilim are like like these beings that don't correctly have souls, and therefore whenever they die they become demons, that it is possible for like to do that now, because Paul seems to think, and actually this is the thing that Heiser agrees with. Heiser thinks that Paul thinks that this can still happen, which is why I'm like, why on earth would you think that like new demons can be made? Like I don't agree with that idea. Um, and so I don't think that that there's a possibility that there could be human beings that Jesus Christ can't save. Um, but I agree, but I agree but and so this is part of why and then also I don't think that the so so Andrew can watch this later. If you think that the conquest of Canaan's primary purpose was to get rid of the Nephilim, I have a hard time believing that they actually succeeded in that. I have a hard time believing that the conquest of Canaan was actually successful, and they're in getting rid of all the Nephilim, and therefore more successful than the flood of the entire world. Like that's a big problem for me, because I don't know, if you read the accounts of the conquest of Canaan, kind of one of the main points about it is that it wasn't actually that successful. They actually messed up a lot and all the time, and so therefore had ongoing problems with the Canaanites. Like, it didn't work. And so I have a really hard time agreeing with uh, the view that there's a genetic component to it. So yeah. Anything else? We've gone way over.
I just had a quick question with what you said about them believing in good Nephilim, and also how just like tall people or powerful people could be viewed as that. Do you think at the time that King Saul or that Saul became king, do you think they actually viewed him as a Nephilim, even before he kind of turned bad?
I don't think that necessarily they would, because like like again, fundamentally, I think that story, and I said this earlier, that the story is more of a polemical view, which means like outward facing, right? It's a fundamental criticism of like other cultures and their kind of like creation myths, right? I would still put, right, Genesis 1 through 11 is in this like mytho history framework, and a lot of what's going on there is this continual criticism of other, like not explicit and not blatant, but like underneath the surface criticism of other people's creation stories. We saw that in Genesis 1 and all that stuff, and I think it's here too. And so because of that, I don't think they would have really thought of their own. I don't think your average Israelite would have thought of their own people as being a Nephilim. I think that's more of a pejorative that they would have saved for people on the outside, but they would have definitely been like, oh, we can see the effects of it and coming back. And I would argue, and so if you go back and you listen to like whenever I did the Bible study on Mark, what I argue throughout Mark is that this competition, kind of between systems of men and systems of God, continue to happen, and the systems of men are usually led by Nephilim-like characters. Um, that's what Jesus is battling. Jesus is still battling that in the New Testament, and I would argue that Jesus would see somebody like Saul, and actually all the kings. I would argue that this is why God kind of argues against having kings um, entirely. Like I think God probably views the kings as Nephilim like figures. Um, but like I think Jesus thinks of like Pilate, of Herod, of Caesar as these Nephilim like figures. And I, but I think he reorients how we're supposed to interact with them and deal with them. And right and like And I think this is why, like the New Testament is really concerned about like how do we deal and how do we fight against principalities and powers. Like whenever it's talking about like principalities and powers, it's talking about, and this comes from Michael Heiser. It's talking about like the sons of God, and if it's talking about the sons of God, it's also talking about like the Nephilim too. It's talking about the things and the people that come from like the sons of God. And so like yeah, we're still like we're still fighting that, and that's how I think they would have thought about it, and that's how I think we should think about it. Final questions? All right, cool. I'm gonna end it there. We will talk about Calvinism and dynamic omniscience, open theism at some point in the future. We will do that, Christian. But thank you all. I will stop the recording there.